Well, welcome to Check Up with Dr. Mark. And we're here today with Dr. Dale Ryan. Dale Ryan is from Fuller Seminary. He is the executive director, I'll say, although he's called director. He's also called another bozo on the bus, really. Dr. Dale Ryan is the director of the Institute for Recovery Ministry at Fuller Seminary. And for those of you who may not know what Fuller Seminary is, Fuller Seminary is a training school for people in professional ministry at all levels, from master's degree to PhD programs. And what's really wonderful about the Institute for Recovery Ministry is that people can acquire master's degrees that emphasize recovery ministry along with other things. So welcome, Dr. Ryan. I thank God you're here with us today. And please share more about your bio and also your recovery story.
Thanks, Mark. Really happy to be with you today. And greetings to everybody who's sheltering at home and all of that. It's a difficult time. My own story is a pretty long one. Ministry is a second career for me. I have a PhD in biochemistry, actually, and taught at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a number of years. And then actually fairly early on in that career, it became obvious, long story, that this wasn't where God wanted me to be. So I went to seminary. After seminary, took a position at a local church in Southern California. And my own recovery journey is kind of a long and complicated one, like most of us. Yeah. I'm a survivor of childhood emotional and spiritual abuse. I'm a recovering codependent, primarily with respect to my son, who is a drug addict alcoholic. Now, I don't know exactly. I decided once that it's very codependent to keep track of your loved one's sobriety date. So it's more than 15 years at least. So
is that your responsibility?
Well, it's not my responsibility. So also a recovering work addict and ministry addict and religious addict. And there's a number of other items. It's a long list. And so hence a complicated story. I was one sick puppy. I tend to mark the beginning of my recovery journey at a moment in my last year in seminary. And it was the day that I went to my first 12-step group. I didn't go to my first 12-step group because I thought I needed to go to my first 12-step group. I went to my first 12-step group because it was an assignment for a class.
Oh, so you're okay. You want the A, you go to the 12-step group. Interesting, everybody. Recovery, get the A.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, so it was midwinter in Minneapolis. I drove downtown to this, it looked like a really run-down old building, went down to the basement. There's this circle of cheap plastic folding chairs and a table off to the side with a pot full of coffee. And got there early because I'm just compulsive about early, and it's an anxiety management strategy. I was sitting there thinking I'd actually just finished a paper. I think it was like a 30-page paper about the Christology of Maximus the Confessor. Very esoteric, very refined. I think he was a 4th century bishop and was involved in what's called the Monothelite controversy. Nobody, I'm guessing very few people know what that is. But it was all very studious and academic. And at the time, I thought that I was getting into the really advanced Christian stuff. I think that was part of my motivation for going to seminary. I didn't want to just be about the basics. I wanted to get into all of that interesting, complicated stuff. And I remember sitting there, this is 35 years later, have some shame around this, but I remember sitting there thinking, why do they make MDiv students go to AA. I mean, I came to seminary to learn more about God, and I'm pretty sure I know more about God than anybody who's going to come to this room. It became apparent very, very quickly that this is not a Betty Ford alumni group. This was late stage street drunk group.
Street drunk group, yeah.
Everybody spent time on the streets and looked pretty. You could tell about that hard life had a huge impact on most of the people sitting there in the room. And it turns out I have never been more wrong about anything in my entire life. I did not know more about God. And that what the principal memory and the moment of clarity for me came when they were passing out medallions, some AA traditions. They ask anybody who's, sober for 30 days, 90 days, a year, 5 years, 10 years. And this guy, I'm going to call him Joe. I don't any idea what his name was, but he'd been sober for 30 days.
Oh, yeah.
So he comes up the front, and it was the custom in that group to give anybody who comes to get a medallion 2 minutes to say something. This guy was not a polished public speaker, but he said something like this. He said, I haven't been able to put together more than a couple of days sobriety in a row for 20 years. And I came to my first group, and I got something. I don't know. I'm pretty clueless, what happened. But I've been sober for 30 days. And I really didn't get the God stuff when I first started. It just really confused me. Fortunately, they told me, if you don't get the God stuff yet, just, you're going to need to pick a higher power, but pick somebody other than you. You've already made a mess of your life. So picking you as your higher power, you're just going to get more of the same. So pick someone outside. If you're completely clueless about who to choose, pick a doorknob as your higher power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everybody in your audience who goes to 12-step groups will get that kind of inside joke. Picking a doorknob is not a good choice as a higher power, but it's what you do when you are completely clueless about the God part of things, and the spiritual part of things. And so it was this public confession of cluelessness that had seems to be the kind of thing that God honors. And you could tell listening to this guy. What I remember mostly is not so much the words he said, but you could tell from his body language that this guy had a really powerful experience. He didn't have the words that I thought were the best words to describe it, but it was the grace of God. Somehow this guy had gotten a dose of the grace of God, and it was transforming his life, and he wanted more. He wanted to figure out more. He wanted to be all in. He was ready.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there. The main moment of clarity for me came shortly after he sat down. And I'm thinking, I can't get that kind of stuff out of my God. This guy's getting power for life transformation out of his God. And he's completely clueless about God. So here I am. I know more about God than everybody here. And I can't get anything but shame out of it. But this guy who knows absolutely nothing about God is having a powerful, transformative experience of the grace of God. And that really confused me. But it was also a moment of enormous clarity. Yeah. And what was clear to me was that if I could not find the spiritual humility to learn from Joe, who knew nothing about God, that I was going to be stuck with the God that I've been worshiping and serving for a long time. It turns out the God that I had been worshiping and serving for a long time was what I now call the God of impossible expectation. This is the God who, the image comes to mind, I can't remember who to credit for this image, but the image is you're sort of climbing up a ladder towards God, you're getting closer and closer. When you get close to the top, God leans down and adds more rung to the ladder. That's That's the God of impossible expectation. You're never good enough. You're always
All that,
ashamed.
yeah.
It's all performance stuff, and it turns out to be an idol that I crafted for myself out of my experience of my father, who was very performance oriented, very shaming, very abusive, verbally and spiritually.
Yeah,
Um,
and also too, that's an important point because I think many of our viewers are struggling with that performance-based
yeah,
life.
yeah. Certainly, if you're going to do recovery stuff in a Christian context, you're going to do anything in a Christian context, you're going to be working with people who have a big dose of performance orientation.
Yeah,
And what you do if you're in a very performance oriented context is that you try harder, you try hardest, and you get tired. That's what happens. You get tired and depressed. That's basically what happened to me. I got tired and depressed. I
yeah.
couldn't make it work.
Mm.
I used to have that's a funny story. This is years ago now, but I used to have a recurring nightmare
Mm.
over a course of, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, maybe 7 or 8 times. I'd have this same nightmare. And it wasn't a narrative dream. It was this kind of snapshot dream. I'm looking at this big vat sitting on top of a fire, and all the sermons preached on America in America on a particular Sunday had been put into this vat and boiled down to see what the essence was when you got rid of all the dross, all the funny stories and anecdotes and stuff that doesn't matter that much. And the dream is I'm looking over the edge of this huge vat down to what's left.
Oh yeah,
There's this message in what do you call those alphabet soup letters?
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
the
Right.
message, it's like you boil everything down and it says try harder.
Ooh.
And I wake up terrified because that is not even remotely close to being Christian stuff. Try harder is not what the Christian gospel's about. It's a lot of us have to try hard until we eventually have our faces shoved into our powerlessness.
Mm.
But the recovery journey is not about trying harder, trying hardest, and
Oh.
getting tired and relapsing or whatever.
True, and I think too. Tell us how where the church is now, where the church needs to. I mean, that try harder fallacy and untruth, falsity, however you want to put it. That whole unbiblical teaching of try harder. What does the church need to do today to overcome that? And what difficulties are you observing as you've been teaching about recovery and you've been living recovery and you're part of the church and
Right.
God has used you, but I'm curious because I've been observing this probably the same things, but we want to hear from you today.
Yeah. Well, the church in America at the beginning of the 21st century is, in my view, in pretty bad shape. It's lost its moorings. There's all kinds of signs of this. I think it's going to take a change. It's not a problem that you can kind of do some little tweaks and work your way out of. You're not going to change your style of worship music and fix this.
Yeah.
It's going to take a change about the scale of the Protestant Reformation, I think.
Yeah.
I have no clue how that's going to happen. I'm not a prophet or a son of the prophets. But I think that's what it's going to change. Now, I can get very depressed about that because it seems like a staggeringly large thing and I can't figure out how it will be done. But it's going to have to be a God thing. So it's another thing to recognize our powerlessness about. On the other hand, I see some pretty encouraging signs, and maybe I should emphasize that. When I first started working this area, I made a point of talking to lots of pastors about this. This was late 80s,
Yeah.
so a long time ago. And what I would hear, typically what I would hear is, uh, I'm really excited about what you're doing. Really, it's very exciting stuff. And if we had anybody in our congregation that had these kind of problems, I'd want to talk to you more. Okay,
Oh,
so that was the norm.
yeah.
That is not the norm today. I'll talk to pastors, and what pastors will typically say is, "I know we got a problem. I have no idea what to do about it. I'm not sure." I talked to one guy a while back who said, "I don't know what to do about this. I'm in a congregation where if you move the communion table 3 feet to the left, you can get fired. So it's not a change-friendly kind of place, you
Oh
know."
my goodness.
And there's a lot of inertia. There's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of denial. But there are also no shortage of encouraging signs. Just that recognition that this problem is our problem has changed.
Okay. Let's.
I think that creates brand new opportunities uh,
Mm-hmm.
that we need to. Reminds me of the fields are white to harvest kind of stuff. You know, there's work to be done. It won't happen overnight. It will take time, but there's a whole lot of people out there who, if they knew how to proceed, would at least be making mistakes in the right direction. And that, I think, is what we need right now. We need to be making a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
Uh, we need to. This is not yet a time to figure out, to decide we know how to do recovery ministry in the Christian context. So I think we need to be doing a lot of creative things, because we don't know yet the best way to do it. And the best way to do it is not going to be the same in different faith traditions. It's not going to be the same in different social contexts. We're going to have to find 15 ways to do this in the local church, not just one.
Absolutely. But
Yeah.
I'm hearing you say though, there's hope in the church today. But I think, what would you say? Because many of our viewers struggle, and we've dealt with this too, and in the leadership is the whole us versus them problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's those people. It's us who are not in recovery, and it's them who are in recovery and don't come into our backyard.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing new about us them.
No, it isn't. But
The persistent problem in the Christian community for as long as it's been about. You will recall in the early church, they did a lot of this "I of Paul, I of Apollos" kind of stuff.
true. Yeah.
Sides and this has also been a major issue in recovery culture
Mhm.
since the late 1930s. It was a central issue for Bill when he was putting together the Big Book of the 12 Steps,
Yep.
trying to somehow retain the spiritual wisdom and spiritual practices that he learned in Oxford Group, and at the same time making room for people to get in the door without being overwhelmed with a whole bag of theology that they had to accept in order to get started. And you know, even today, I don't think there's much of a consensus about how good a job Bill did with that. I think it's a pretty reasonable balance. Um, if you have to get it all right before you can get started,
Mhm.
that's a pretty high entry fee, and a lot of people just can't go there. It's exhausting to even think about it. And to be fair, Jesus didn't go about village to village saying, "Get your theology right, and then you can get in." He
No.
didn't pass out his 3-volume book of systematics to people that read this and then come back. Yeah,
Ooh.
he had running a pretty damaged, broken, hurting, struggling, missing the mark people. And he said, "Well, come on, why don't you come and see?"
Yeah.
And that's a real low entry fee kind of strategy that the church has abandoned for most of its history, really. Um, but
Well, yeah, and I think that's what too. We want to, as brothers in Christ, brothers and sisters in Christ, we want to reach out to everyone around us to say, "Y'all come,
yeah,
y'all come on in. It doesn't matter where
yeah,
you've been, what you've done. Jesus loves you. We do too, and it's all us." So and that's how I'm just wanting to pick your brain about how the church can be better at that.
yeah. Well, the place that 10 years ago, I didn't know anybody working on this particular issue at all.
Mm.
There was a few places that were, but they're basically churches with recovery ministries.
Yep.
But you have a children's ministry, you have a music ministry, you have recovery ministry. Recovery ministry is part of the main mainstream. Actually, it's usually pretty marginalized, right, in the congregation, but at least it's treated like another ministry of the church. But in the last decade or so, there have been really a remarkable number of churches that don't want to be churches with a recovery ministry. They want to be a recovery church.
Okay. That's
And
good. Good to know.
yeah, where pretty much everything you do is about that. If you want to do missions in a recovery church, you're going to send a couple old timers to go start 12-step groups in the Philippines,
Mhm.
or to educate pastors there about things. That'll be a missions progress in a recovery church. And you do worship differently. And your theology is different. Your theology is not so much focused on uh, getting all the right answers to all the right questions, particularly if the questions are not questions that people that's sitting in the pews are actually, in fact, asking. So, if you have all the right answers to all questions that no one cares about, you're not doing the kind of pastoral theology that I think is really important
Right.
at this particular time in history. And that's going to look different
Mhm.
than just repeating what, 40, 50-year-old books of systematics had to say. You need to be asking um, questions that force us to get close, to
Yeah.
really be uh, people who have been sent the way Jesus was sent. And,
Yes.
and when you do that, you wind up asking very different kinds of questions. You're not interrogating people to see if they have the right answers, but you're asking uh, what questions they have and whether you have anything that's of value.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think too. It's now let's kind of turn the look at that, but also now look at our present situation with COVID-19. Keeping people home. It's an amazing month that's gone by, and of course we got months ahead of
Right?
recovery.
Yeah.
Um, and because of that whole isolation problem, this is the felt need right now.
Yeah.
What do you sense is
Yeah.
the most effective way of helping our brothers and sisters cope who are in recovery, but also everyone?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real game changer, I think, in some major ways. I mean, there is no shortage of online 12-step meetings. AA has many, NA has many advantages, or you can go to a meeting anywhere in the world, right?
Okay.
So there's some significant constraints to online meetings and the kind of intimacy that's possible there. But I think this is a really good time to be learning how to do that kind of thing well.
Mhm.
Um, and that'll serve us well for the future, because I don't think um, it's just a whole nother way to connect with people. I
Yeah.
mean, think of the way in which, for example, TED Talks
Oh,
have
yeah. Right.
have changed our perception of where do I go to learn things. I mean, it's pretty dramatic. And I think a whole lot of people, particularly younger people who are, adapt more quickly to new technologies than us older folks.
That's true.
Was been, I think, 5 years ago now that I first called my grandson to help
Mm.
me solve a problem on my iPhone because he had more technological savvy about phones than I did. That's just a symptom of a much larger issue that we really need to be engaging deeply in online stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think actually what you've done in Grand Rapids is a really interesting model for this, having lots of opportunities for people to tell their stories. Short talks, kind of like short speaker meetings,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. I've done some of that stuff at Fuller, having faculty members in recovery tell their stories and graduates of Fuller telling their stories. And it had a pretty significant impact on the culture there, at least for a period of time. But I do think the internet has all kinds of strengths. It's got all kinds of weaknesses. It's going to work for some people better than others. But that's also true of face-to-face groups. I
Yeah.
a woman not that long ago who told me her story about going to Al-Anon for the first time, and she went to a hospital meeting. She got there the first night, parked in the parking lot, and drove home because she couldn't get herself out of the car and go to the meeting. Next week, she went to the same meeting, sat in the parking lot, went home.
Mm-hmm.
Third week, she got there and was able to get inside of the room and sat and didn't say anything. That's an example of one of the weaknesses of face-to-face meetings. If you're not familiar with it, you don't know what to expect. It can feel terrifying.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Is this a cult of some kind that I'm going to get inducted in? Is there a secret handshake? And it certainly feels, certainly for Christians, it feels really different than what you do in a Christian context. In a Christian context, almost any kind of meeting of any kind, including most recovery meetings, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to sing a song.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody in AA sings songs.
Oh.
It's a different culture. So there's this experience of a brand new culture that you're not a part of. You have the same kind of disorientation and confusion that anybody has going into a new culture.
Great point. And that culture is so true. After 20 years of doing recovery ministry in person here in Grand Rapids at the community recovery, and now doing things online, it's been a whole different dynamic. Just in this past month, it's a transformation, and we're learning what that's about. It's a different modality, a different way of connecting.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who are watching, we want to just have you know that these reflections from Dr. Ryan, they're helping us to connect with you, to say it's okay. There's different ways of connecting in Christ and recovery. Jesus tells you and me through many different modalities, just come on in, come to me. You don't have to try harder. And in light of that, Dr. Ryan, tell us more about the National Association of Christian Recovery.
Yeah. After a stint as on the staff of a local church, I set up a 501c3, a nonprofit organization called Christian Recovery International, and it was really a ministry incubator, is what it was. So in the business world, they have business incubators who collect entrepreneurs and give them whatever resources they need to get started, and try to nurture young businesses. So I was very frustrated by the absence of robust ministries for different kinds of problems in the Christian context. So that was what I was going to try and do. I did that for quite a while. One of the ministries we set up, and probably the most successful and robust of the ministries, was the National Association for Christian Recovery. It was intended originally to be kind of a membership. I remember sitting in a staff meeting at the church, and it was the music minister's chance that week to give a report about what he was doing.
Hmm.
And he gave this report about a new handbell choir he was starting. I do not like handbell choir music. I'm sorry to all of you out there who love handbell choirs, just personal preference. And he had found a new director. He had purchased for him a membership in the National Choir Directors, Handbell Choir Directors Association. He had acquired a copy of the National Handbell Association magazine for this person to get on a regular basis. And I was sitting there thinking, we've got none of that stuff. There's nothing to join. There's no magazine to get that's about Christians in recovery. And that was really the main impetus was for the National Association for Christian Recovery. Now it's gone through a variety of different executive directors over the years. But it's still got a very active and I think robust website, nacr.org, and a pretty large web presence there.
Yeah.
So it's one, you'll find all kinds of articles and videos and stuff about Christian spirituality and connecting as a Christian with the 12 steps. How do you navigate those two cultures?
Yeah.
You got one foot in Christian culture and one foot in recovery culture. Not everybody in Christian culture understands the recovery culture, and not everybody in recovery culture understands the Christian culture. So you're trying to navigate. I mean, it's the same kind of anxieties and frustrations that missionaries have. They go to a new culture, and it takes a while to figure out how to be both cultures, how to be bicultural. But Christians in recovery are going to probably have to be bicultural, and there's a long learning process about how to do that. Well, I think there's a lot of resources at the NACR that would help people with that process.
Beautiful. Yeah. So cross-cultural within the Christian community, and for those who are watching and you're not a Christian believer, but you're seeking about who God is, we invite you to seek who Jesus is. That's the first thing. And second thing is that, yeah, they're people, as they come to know Christ, we form different cultures and traditions. But again, we all go back to Jesus, and that's the main focus.
Yeah.
Is the way, the truth, and the life. And he is our higher power in recovery, and also he is Lord of our lives. But I thank God that the National Association of Christian Recovery is there to help bring those resources to the front. So
it can be confusing. I just briefly mentioned one confusing factor is that probably most of your audience understands that the Christian culture is not monolithic, right? There's all kinds of diversity. We have crazies of every kind and sane people of every kind in the Christian context. And recovery culture is not monolithic either. NA is not the same as AA, not the same as SA, certainly not the same as Al-Anon. And so finding your place in both Christian culture and in recovery culture, it just takes some time. You need to be kind to yourself as you sort through all those options, and know that somehow you're at least making mistakes in the right direction, and that over the long haul that gets you someplace. So,
well, from one bozo on the bus to another bozo on the bus, Brother Dale, what would you have to give to us right now to take away as we close?
Well, I think I want to say something about a coronavirus, because that's the consuming reality at the present time, and it is there are no positives to it. I think there's opportunities for learning in an experience like this. It's a reminder of our powerlessness, if nothing else, that we are not powerful enough to eliminate at the present time quickly a little RNA virus that's so small you can't see and only encodes 2 proteins that's going to kill hundreds of thousands of people by the time it's done worldwide. And we need to support each other in this time of isolation. It's harder in some ways on extroverts than it is on introverts, so the pain is not distributed evenly. I am a world-class introvert, an Olympic-level introvert. I learned this as a child. I was what's called a lost child as a child. I would hide out in my closet and close the door and read books, because if you were visible in my family, you were a target. So I had ninja level disappearance skills by the age of 7 or 8. And that, of course, doesn't serve you very well through most of life, but it turns out some of it helps right now. I'm not traumatized by not being able to get out. But a number of my extrovert friends are really suffering during this time. And I think praying for them, going out of your way to contact them. There is still the telephone, even though I think we need to be doing a whole lot more internet savvy stuff. The old slogan, pick up the phone, still rings true to me. You can call people. People are contactable. And we need to be doing a whole lot of that. It makes a huge difference. The smallest of contacts, I think, at this time, really helps.
Dr. Ryan, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
So thankful for how God has blessed your work and led you to do what you do, because it is vital in helping God's people bring recovery to those who need help. God bless you all who are watching. I'm Dr. Mark. Peace.
Thanks, Mark. Bye now.